is the coming of age of witchcraft. So we've done the rebirth of witchcraft, we've done the adolescence of witchcraft, and this is the coming of age of witchcraft. So check out my previous videos if this is the first one you've seen. So you can watch this one as a standalone video. So why have I got a picture of Ronald Hutton on the coming of age of witchcraft, apart from the fact he's a very nice man? It's because he is the author of The Triumph of the Moon, a history of modern pagan witchcraft. And he was actually invited or encouraged to write The Triumph of the Moon by a group of Wiccan elders who had heard the story of an unbroken initiatory line stretching back into antiquity, blah, 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 and thought it sounded a bit unlikely. So they wanted a history that was actually on a proper footing. And so they were really pleased when Ronald Hutton decided to write the history of modern pagan witchcraft. And if you haven't read it, do. It's very good. As I've heard him speak so many times, when I read it, I actually hear it in his voice. So I find it very lovely to read. So do give it a try. It's very good. But yes, it was first written in 1999 after his previous work, which was Pagan Religions of the Ancient British Isles, and it's a very important, groundbreaking piece of historical analysis. So check it out. So thinking about the 1990s, so we looked at the 1980s last time, and one of the things that really characterized the 90s was the rise of eco-paganism. And here we have on the right the colour photo is a picture of some eco-pagans at Circle Sanctuary, I believe. I think it's from Graham Harvey's website, animism.org.uk. And the other one is from the Twyford Down protests, which were a protest against an absolutely enormous road cutting being made through a hill that was a site of special scientific interest, and it also had a lot of unique archaeological trackways on top of it. This did not stop the government from cutting a massive hole through this hill, and the protesters did really well. And I actually went up to visit them one day in the early 90s, and they told me that just recently they'd done a ritual, and they'd received a message from some druids in France, and the druids in France said, "Oh, we'll send you some energy around 9 o'clock." So they were sort of stood about in their circle waiting for this energy, and like, "Oh, I can't feel anything." And then suddenly this enormous sort of band of light came across the sky and down into their circle. They're like, "Well, that'll be the energy then." Wow. Yeah, an amazing group of people. Full respect to them. And I actually dedicated my first book to the Dongers of Twyford Down. So I hope they noticed. But anyway, fine group of people, and they did wonderful things trying to save Twyford Down. There were also further road protests against the M11 cutting a massive swathe through Oxley's Wood in North London. And various other, the Newbury Road protests, which went on for quite a long time. And people were living in trees in an attempt to stop the motorway being built through there. Again, sadly without success, but good try. And indeed, there were lots of pagans who, pagans in the sense of large P pagans as opposed to small P pagans, who got involved with these protests. And one of the groups that was formed by pagans was Dragon, which was a network of eco-pagans. And I knew several people who were in Dragon. And some of the people who were involved with Dragon were also involved with progressive Wicker. And progressive Wicca was a really important thing. It was much more kind of egalitarian. It sought to kind of overcome the differences between Alexandrian and Gardnerian Wicca that existed at the time. And it was much more open, the rituals much more participatory, and they sought to offer like a more kind of empowered, engaged version of Wicca than existed at the time. And obviously there were people outside of the official progressive Wicca group who were working in progressive ways. But I think the fact that they nailed their colours to the mast and articulated this was really, really important. So there's a number of articles around about the efforts of Tam Campbell, Ariadne Rainbird and David Rankin. And I actually included an article written by Tam Campbell as an appendix to my book on inclusive Wicca, because I think in many ways inclusive Wicca is inspired by progressive Wicca. And it's one of the reasons that, progressive Wicca just said, look, we're a tendency within Gardnerian and Alexandrian Wicca. We don't need to go and found a new tradition. We're sitting right here, thank you very much. And I decided to do the same with inclusive Wicca, because eventually most people have now forgotten that there was ever such a thing as progressive Wicca, and everybody does their rituals in the same sort of way, which is much more participatory and so on. And I'm sure that the same thing will happen with inclusive Wicca, because it's an idea whose time has come. Later on, in order to kind of avoid any sort of rancor that might occur by being called progressive Wicca, because I guess people felt that it implied that the rest of Wicca wasn't progressive, which wasn't necessarily the case, as I said, and it wasn't what they were trying to say. They were just trying to say, hey, let's do these progressive things. They relabeled it as progressive witchcraft. And later on, around that time, there was a book called Progressive Witchcraft by Gavin Bone and Janet Farrar, which is very good. These two things kind of were very similar in ethos and very, arose around the same time. And in some ways were linked together. So anyway, both equally important efforts to make Wicca more egalitarian. So the book that I mentioned, The Triumph of the Moon, came by Ronald Hutton, came out in 1999. And it was really, really important because it showed how the cultural strands that fed into what became modern Wicca. And I actually talked about some of those in my previous video, which owed quite a lot to the ideas of Ronald Hutton. And it's why he pops up in my reading list on nearly every one of these presentations. It's a really important book. It shows how various cultural strands came together and created the Wicca that we know and love. So yes, have a read. So another thing that was quite important during the 1990s was 90s witch movies, because previously a lot of witch movies had been a bit off the mark, and either like hags with green skin or like they were for children, so Mary Poppins and bedknobs and broomsticks and that kind of stuff, whereas these were somewhat more edgy and but also presented witches as kind of young and sexy and interesting and a bit alternative. So taking a look at some of these, Kiki's Delivery Service, which is a Studio Ghibli movie, it's absolutely adorable. It's about a young witch who goes off to fend for herself in a strange town, and the adventures that she has. It's just really, really sweet movie. I love Studio Ghibli movies, and this one's no exception. It's just lovely. Then we have The Craft, made in 1996, and I must confess that I watched it with a friend and we laughed all the way through, or at least. So interestingly, for this movie, they actually hired a Wiccan to help them with the script, and you can see the exact point in the movie when the Wiccan who was helping with the script just resigned and went, right, I'm off now, this is getting silly. And that's the point where we started laughing at the script. As in the first half of the movie, they get a hold of some sort of witchy book, which is basically the Wiccan Book of Shadows, and they're doing rituals down by the seashore, and it's really nice. And then it all gets kind of sinister, and you know, the main character goes off the rails completely and stuff. But anyway, it's kind of fun, and I wouldn't mind seeing it again, because it'd be interesting. I think they're doing a sequel, aren't they? I'm not sure. But anyway, fun movie. So my favourite one, of course, of this period has to be Practical Magic. It's a great movie. I love the aunts and their chocolate cake, and I love the two sisters, and yeah, it's just a great movie. I mean, the only thing I would criticize about Practical Magic has to be that they never actually do like a proper ritual as such. There's that whole bit with the candles and stuff, but then all the neighbor ladies show up with like regular brooms, and it's kind of, they're always seeking to undermine actual ritual, but still great movie, very enjoyable. And then on the bottom row we have some TV, and the Addams Family, the movie as well, of course. So I never saw Sabrina the Teenage Witch, although I actually had a rescue cat that we got from a cattery, from the RSPCA in the UK, and her name was Sabrina when we got her, and it kind of got shortened to Bean. But I do have a lovely picture of her sitting on my broom. But anyway, yeah, Sabrina the Teenage Witch was very popular at the time, hence why the staff of the cat shelter decided to call the cat Sabrina, I assume. Now, I've included Buffy the Vampire Slayer because it has an actual Wiccan character in it. Like, wow, it's unheard of. Thank you, Joss Whedon. And that Wiccan character was, of course, Willow Rosenberg, who you can see on the right over there. The person in front of her looks like she's been photoshopped in. Anyway, there you go. Early example of bad photoshopping, I think. And then we have one of my favourite movie portrayals of a witch of all time, has to be Angelica Huston as Morticia Addams. It's genius level stuff. I mean, like, I love the Addams Family, and I love Wednesday Addams. I particularly like it when she goes to the summer camp and takes the mickey out of the sort of pilgrim reenactment thing. So good. So yeah, very fond of that movie. But yeah, the reason I included these for two reasons. One is because every time there's a really cool witch movie, it encourages people to seek out the real craft. So we had sort of influxes caused by Practical Magic, and I think we had an influx caused by the craft, and you know, probably, I don't know about Kiki's Delivery Service or Sabrina the Teenage Witch, but what all these movies have in common is that we no longer have, you know, the characters are kind of more real, they are attractive looking, and you know, they have lives and they've got an inner life and a motive and stuff. They're not just cardboard cutouts of a witch. So some good stuff here. I mean, I think the 90s has to have been the kind of the golden period for witch movies. And in the previous video, of course, I mentioned Witches of Eastwick, which is great because it's got Susan Sarandon and Cher, and I can't think who the other one was. We looked it up and I've forgotten. Anyway, that was 1989, I think. So nearly the 90s. But yeah, it was just great. So good stuff. And I think it represents a turning point even before Harry Potter, making witches seem more wholesome and nice. There's this sort of, hey, witches are sexy kind of idea floating about in the culture and the zeitgeist. So that's probably good. Anyway, so the naughties. So I think so at this point, like the way pagans were communicating, like early naughties before Facebook came along in about 2006, the way that pagans were communicating with each other over the internet, which had been around for you know, I think like most people had access to the internet by about 2000. I think I first went on the internet in about 1996 or something. So it was really starting to take off by the early years of the previous decade, so long ago. People were on like PHBB forums, and there were some really great forums around where you can have really good in-depth discussions, unlike Facebook, where the discussions are kind of and yeah, there was some really good stuff around. There was a forum in the UK called Wicker UK, which was really, really good, and then changed its name to the Pagan Network. And I met some really cool people on there that I'm still online friends with, which is pretty cool. Right, so the important thing at this point is the rise of third wave feminism. And third wave feminism, so first wave feminism, I think I mentioned before, was like about women getting legal rights. Second wave feminism is more like, hey, what is the essential nature of woman? And then third wave feminism is, there is no essential nature of woman. Let's focus on being more inclusive towards LGBTQIA people and people of color, and actually deconstructing and being a bit postmodern about gender and similar notions, and much more sort of queer friendly, kink friendly, and generally more trans inclusive. Also, as mentioned, we have the rise of social media. I think Twitter started around the same time as Facebook, maybe a bit earlier. I mean, I didn't join Twitter till about 2011, I think. Was it? No, 2008 I joined Twitter. And I joined Facebook really early on, before it was even opened up beyond university, the people who'd been at university. So, because initially they made it like a kind of university yearbook, which is why it's called Facebook. Anyway, so social media are now allowed people to communicate with each other and share ideas. So quite useful in some ways. We also have the rise of, I mean, who remembers LiveJournal? Now that was a thing. There was like whole groups of people on LiveJournal who were sort of co-blogging together and doing all sorts of exciting creative stuff. And it is all gone. It's very sad. Well, you can still access some of it, but that lively buzz that was going on is no longer with us. But yeah, there's some great pagan stuff on LiveJournal. We have the rise of Tumblr and Tumblr witches. We have increasing interest in traditional or folkloric witchcraft. I mean, that had been there before, but it started to become a lot more accessible at this point. very important development, the start of the Unnamed Path. The first podcast of the Unnamed Path was 2007, and also anti-fracking protests and the start of Wild Hunt Pagan News, which was started by Jason Pitzel-Waters. Now, I can't remember the exact date when he started it, and I couldn't find the information online. I guess I could have gone back and looked for their earliest post. But the idea of a pagan news service with actual pagan journalism was new and exciting. And I remember the mailing list where I was on a mailing list where he announced it. So it was definitely, it must have been pre-2006, I guess. Anyway, it's very exciting. So the pictures on this slide are, the top one is the Warriors Call doing an anti-fracking protest in the UK somewhere. And the bottom picture is Eddie Gutierrez, Hyperion of the Unnamed Path. Now, the reason I've included the Unnamed Path is because I think that Eddie Gutierrez's work was really important. He came up with the concept of resonance, which is the idea of two similar people bringing their energies into harmony with each other and creating, it's like, you know, two strings of a guitar vibrating and producing a new note or a chord as a result of their vibration. So he started the Unnamed Path, which was a shamanic path for men who love men. I'm following them on Instagram, and they are apparently inclusive of trans men as well, which is great. And unfortunately, Eddie Gutierrez passed away at the age of 53, which is really sad because he created the, you know, amazing guy, did some great work. But there he is standing in front of his altar. So there, important guy. Look up his stuff, it's good. Okay, the teens. Unfortunately, my picture, my video, little insert of me talking in the corner is going to be over the Inclusive Wicker logo, which is at the top right of this slide. Anyway, it's the first bullet point on my slide. Inclusive Wicker, I started writing All Acts of Love and Pleasure, Inclusive Wicker, in 2012, I think. And I actually included a lot of stuff that I'd written earlier as well. So I'd certainly been thinking about how to make Wicker more LGBT inclusive since about 1995, so quite a long time. And the book came out in 2014, and that same summer I was working on a workshop. Just realised, oh no, I can't. I was thinking I could move the graphic, but of course I'm in view of PowerPoint. Anyway, so I was running a workshop on LGBT Wicker, and I was trying to make a poster for the workshop, and I was sat there going, well, I could have a rainbow, but I haven't got 6 different colours of felt tip, and rainbows have been kind of done, right? So, and I was sitting there, and the symbol of the heart and the 2 moons just kind of bypassed my brain, came down my arm and through my hand and onto the paper, and thus the moon and heart symbol was born. And I really like it because to me it means that the central mystery of Wicca is love, and not allegedly creating polarity between a man and a woman or something, which seems like hopelessly exclusive to me. Anyway, so I think Inclusive Wicca is an important historical development. Others may, your mileage may vary, as they say. Apparently, there's a thing called fourth wave feminism. I read a bit about it, and I honestly couldn't see that it was any different from third wave feminism. except possibly that it has even more emphasis on including women of colour and seeing things from the perspective of Black, Indigenous and people of colour. So, but anyway, whichever wave of feminism we're in, it absolutely should include different perspectives, including people of colour, Black and Indigenous people, and disabled people, and LGBTQIA, and I'm in favour of a trans inclusive feminism, because apart from anything else, I'm non-binary. But trans women are on the receiving end of the same misogyny and other violence that other women, cis women, experience. So of course they should be included in feminism, and of course they're women. Right. So there. Anyway, another thing that was different about this decade was the rise of mobile phones, which meant that it was much easier to get onto social media because you just went in on your phone. And so that seemed important to include. Another thing that's really important is the Nameless Art Conference. Now, the Nameless Art Conference, I think it started in 2014 or 15. I think there's probably been about 5 of them now. It's a gathering where people get together to talk about traditional and folkloric witchcraft, and the movers and shakers of folkloric and traditional witchcraft go there and talk about interesting stuff. And I've been to a couple of them, and they were very, very good indeed. It's also where I met Gemma Gary, pictured in the picture on the right, who has written some very interesting books on folkloric traditional witchcraft, particularly based in Cornwall, where she lives. Check out her work if you are not familiar with it. And a lot of this renaissance, this flowering of traditional witchcraft has been underpinned by the efforts of Troy Books, who publish a lot of very nice, attractive volumes on folkloric and traditional witchcraft. So check them out. And I think it's also important to mention apocalyptic witchcraft, which is Peter Gray and Alkistis Demesh, and basically a witchcraft that addresses the ecological disaster that we currently occupy. And it's talking about, okay, well, how do we deal with the fact that we're in the middle of a climate apocalypse from a magical perspective? And again, very important piece of writing, especially given all the political stuff that's gone down recently. So yeah, check out the work of Peter Gray. So yeah, I think the folkloric witchcraft is very, and traditional witchcraft is a very exciting field right now. Lots going on, very interesting, and there's some really good books on the subject coming out as well. So for example, Besom, Stang and Sword by Tara Love Maguire and Christopher Orapello, and The Crooked Path by Kelden Mercury. Very recent publications, very good, very accessible as well. And and I have to mention Of Chalk and Flint by Val Thomas, which I have yet to get my hands on, but I want to buy it. So I was going to get it when I next went to the UK, and unfortunately I couldn't go to the UK because of COVID. So I'll get a copy eventually. Can't wait to get my hands on it. So yes, so moving on. A bit of further reading for you. Couple of eco-pagan related things. The Battle of the Beanfield, which I didn't even mention. The Battle of the Beanfield was a particularly violent confrontation between the hippies who wanted to celebrate the solstice at Stonehenge and the extremely heavy-handed British police who came in and basically smashed up their convoy of hippie buses. And this is the history of the Battle of the Beanfield, written by and edited by Andy Worthington, who's also written a book about Stonehenge and how it's been the focus of all kinds of stuff over the years. And from the US, we have Pagan Anarchism by Christopher Scott Thompson, and very interesting as well, showing the links between the two. And hope you will also hang around and check out some of my other videos. We have The Witch's Mirror, episode 7, The Adolescence of Witchcraft, episode 6, The Rebirth of Witchcraft. We're going back in time. Ooh. Episode 5, Witchcraft in the Medieval and Early Modern Period, and episode 4, Witchcraft in Antiquity. And the previous ones are about books and tarot cards and the Two Chalices ritual, which is a ritual of inclusive Wicker. Here we have a photo of me looking into the mirror at the Doreen Valiente exhibition in Brighton in 2014, which was organised by the Doreen Valiente Foundation, and it was absolutely amazing. It was so cool having like, look, take a picture of me reflected in Doreen Valiente's witch mirror, which she personally owned. So that was very exciting, and there was lots of cool stuff from her collection at the exhibition. So do check out the work of the Doreen Valiente Foundation if you're not familiar with it already. So, and finally, check out my books, which are newly published, all shiny, and available from the Doreen Valiente Foundation online shop. And the web address is shop.doreenvaliente.org. These are about the inner work of witchcraft, and I've included ideas from the fairy tradition, from traditional witchcraft, and from Wicker. So an attempt to broaden out the conversation amongst all of the different traditions, and look at what it is that's going on internally inside us. So Dark Mirror, the inner work, is about what's going on inside us when we're doing witchcraft from a embodied spirituality perspective. And the Night Journey talks about how we can use our witchcraft to empower our activism, and talks about group dynamics and overcoming oppression, and pretty relevant to what's going on right now, I have to say. So yeah, check them out. Okay, that is the end of the slides. Hope you've enjoyed watching this episode of The Witch's Mirror. Tune in next time for key ideas in paganism. I do also take requests, so if you have any requests for video topics, add them in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Blessed be, take care.